Hello everyone, welcome to Tom's Eye Music. Today it's cold outside, 15 degrees, and in the studio it's 43, so I'm wearing a hoodie and a hat. But the cold won't stop me from doing a review of the Kali LP-8 studio monitors. I've had these monitors for 2 to 3 weeks. Some of you may have seen my unboxing video. If not, you can check it out. But I've had a couple weeks to break them in, get my head around them, how they sound, and how I work on them. So my initial impressions and what I'm going to tell you about them are a little bit different than the reviews that are out there. I think there's 2 or 3 other reviews on the LP-8s currently out on YouTube. And what was in those reviews was basically the first thing the reviewer said was how amazing the bass response was in the low end, and how the low end was what they noticed first. And that's not really what struck me first. What struck me first was not the low end or really anything, but how flat they sound and how nothing was really that hyped. The low end, the mid-range, and the high end are all more or less even, or as even as your ears can perceive. And in fact, if anything, I think what stood out to me the most was the mid-range and the mid-range clarity, which in speakers of this price bracket, in the $400 to $500 price bracket, it's pretty uncommon to have speakers that have a really good mid-range response. Often there's a boosted low end and high end, and you're hearing kind of a smiley face EQ, the boost and the boost, and kind of a dip in the mid-range. And I say the Kali LP-8s are the exact opposite of that. What I hear most is the linearity and the mid-range response. And I think that was an intent of the designers, was to make as flat of a speaker as possible, given the price range and restrictions you can do with a $500 speaker. But they're $400 right now if you buy them at most retailers, so jump on that if you've been thinking about it. So yeah, I would have to say that their overall response, it's not low-end heavy or high-end heavy, but linear, and the mid-range therefore is what comes out as the thing I noticed the most. Now, I also am going to be posting, or I should say I already did post by the time you view this, a sound test video where I'm comparing the Kalis to a couple other speakers I have, but most interestingly, I'm comparing the Kalis to the JBL LSR 308s, which is the previous generation of the 308P or whatever they call it, but they're all the same speaker essentially. And you can really hear in this sound test what I'm talking about, because in many examples, you're hearing that on the JBLs, for example, you're hearing a little bit more of the low end and high end boosted, whereas the Kalis are just flat. And that to me makes for, on the sound test, the Kalis sound a little less exciting and a little less, ooh, that sounds amazing off the bat. But if what you want to use these for is a true mixing speaker, then that's probably, what you should be going after to begin with. So you can check out a bunch of examples on the sound test video, which I think really kind of highlights some of the things I'm talking about here. But I'm also just going to talk in a little bit more detail, going from the low end of the spectrum to the high end of the spectrum in terms of frequencies and what I noticed. And you can notice things the best after you've heard multiple pairs of speakers. And I've heard quite a few over the years. I've heard Yamaha HS8s, JBL LSR 308s. I used to have the JBL 6328s, the super high-end $3,000 speakers, but life and finances couldn't justify me keeping those, seeing I'm not doing this full time. Event Opals, Focal Solo 6s. I've owned or heard a lot of different speakers, and the linearity of the Kalis is really up there with a lot of them. So let's start with the low end, the bass response of these. There's a lot of information there. I mean, to hear the deep stuff, if you're doing a lot of, electronic music where you need to hear the sub lows, you'd need a subwoofer, but I mean, you'd need that for any speaker in this price range. But to do most, I would say the 98% of mixing, 99% of mixing, these have more than enough low end to do what you're going to do. The low end is really, really tight. That's actually what stood out to me about the low end of these speakers compared to, let's say, other competitors, was the tightness of the low end. Specifically, compared to the JBL. The JBL, when there was bass, the bass was big, and it just sounded like there was a bloom around the low end, which can be appealing, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's accurate. Whereas the Kalis, the low end is there, but it's just tight and concise. So, that's what I'm hearing in the low end compared to the direct competitors, is this tightness and control in the bass, especially compared to the JBLs. And if you listen to the sound test that I did in my other video, there's a couple tracks. There's a hip hop track. It's called Too Late, or It's Too Late. And the electronic kick drum hits you can hear on the JBLs just kind of bloom and blossom, and it's big. Whereas on the Calis, it's tight, and you just hear more of the percussiveness of the bass and less of this bloom. So faster, tighter bass response compared to, let's say, the JBLs. Also, there's another couple tracks I did, some singer-songwriter songs that I used in this example. One of them is called Love Forsaken, and another one is called Waiting for Springtime. And on those, it's typical pop rock singer-songwriter type stuff. And on those, you can just hear the bass guitar and the kick drum. On the Calis, it's just tighter, and it doesn't occupy as much of what you hear, whereas on the JBLs, it's just bigger, and I just tend to use the word bloom, and you hear more of that on the JBLs, which isn't necessarily good or bad. I don't think it's as accurate as the Calis, but if what you're after is a mixing speaker, then the Cali probably is definitely the way to go, and in terms of the low end, that's what you're going after. It's going to do that great, in a great manner for you. So let's move up to the mid-range. The mid-range is really where I think the Calis shine and outperform just about everything in the price range, especially compared to the JBLs. The JBLs definitely have a bit of a scooped sound, meaning the highs are boosted and the lows, or the lows are boosted and the highs are boosted, whichever way you're looking at this. And that boost means a little bit of a dip in the mid-range, and hence the smiley face EQ on the JBLs, which can sound more pleasing but not more accurate. Whereas the Calis, you don't hear that high-end, low-end boost, and the mid-range is really linear. So there's a couple tracks, again, that you can reference on the sound test video I did to validate what I'm saying here. On the hip-hop track, It's Too Late, there's a section in the verse where there's like a Rhodes keys type element playing, and you can hear that stand out more, and almost the percussiveness of the Rhodes instrument or the key instrument being played. You can hear that a little bit better on the Calis than on the JBLs. Also, on the vocal, and I mixed all of these examples, on that vocal, the hip-hop vocal, you can hear I put a real short mono delay, almost like a, not quite a tape delay, but like a short, very short mono delay to give the vocal a little bit more weight to it. And I actually feel you can hear that quite clearly on the Cali clip, the delay on the vocals, versus the JBLs. It's subtle, it's not an echo type of delay, it's just a slight little delay to give the vocals a little bit more weight. And I feel you can actually hear that really well on the Calis. Also, there is another song I mixed. A really good friend of mine did a project, a band called Vesper Heights, or artist Vesper Heights, and the track is called The Garden, and it's all instrumental, and it's primarily piano and strings, string quartet, and he used some interesting sound effects. Like, for example, he recorded the crackle of a vinyl record player to be overlaid through, over top the track to give it kind of an atmospheric, vintage sort of feel and intimacy to the track. And you can, I believe on the Calis, you can hear the vinyl crackle better on that track than on the JBLs. And I also feel that you hear the percussiveness of the piano. There's a lot of single notes on the piano. You can hear that much better on the Calis than on the JBLs on that track. And then lastly, moving on to the high end and the treble, I feel it's a similar comment to what I'm saying about the low end and the bass. It's very linear. It's not hyped. They're not very bright sounding monitors. They're easy on the ears. I have very sensitive hearing to mid-range and high frequencies, and they don't hurt the ears or bother the ears. They're easy to work on for a long time. And if you want examples of the treble, again, there's another singer-songwriter track by the Vesper Heights, the project my friend did, and I mixed, and it's called, what's the name of it? 10 Years Out. And there's a portion of it where he's playing a hi-hat note, or a hi-hat pattern along with acoustic guitar, and the hi-hat sounds incredibly natural to me when I play it back. It sounds a lot like the way the hi-hat sounded in the room where it was recorded. And I own those hi-hats, and the recording came out so close to the way it sounds in the room, and the Calis represent that really well. So, you know, if you're looking for something that you're worried about your ears and being harsh, you're gonna do really well with the Calis in that regard. compared to something like, let's say I have a friend who has the Yamaha HS8s. I used to own the HS80s. They have a lot of mid-range detail, but it's like forward, in your face, and I feel harsh sounding for the mid-range and the high-end. The Calis, they're not like that. They're not this harsh mid-range. They're open and detailed in the mid-range and high-end, but they're not harsh, fatiguing, and forward. So, a great all-around monitor for those things. So, you know, all of this is to say, is it a perfect speaker? No, it's not a perfect speaker. The one criticism I have of it is that it uses Class D amps, which are cheaper and don't produce as much heat compared to Class A and AB amps. But something that's kind of a systemic problem among at least cheaper Class D amps is they produce a lot of hiss. So when there's not even anything plugged into the speaker, no sound source, just simply power to the speaker and turned on, you can hear a good bit of low-level hiss coming from the speakers when there's not even any material played back. So if you're right up close against them, you're going to hear that high-frequency hiss. If you're a couple feet back, it's not going to be as big of a deal. But compared to, let's say, the JBLs, this is actually one area where the JBLs were better than the Calis, as they had a lower level high-frequency hiss coming from the tweeters compared to the Calis. They had a higher level of that hiss. Now, if you're playing any sort of material, your signal-to-noise ratio, your signal of what you're playing is going to be far going to drown out that low level of hiss from the Calis. But it's there. If that's the sort of thing that drives you nuts, these might not be the speakers for you. But it is there. I thought I'd mention it, and it is a higher level of hiss than what I hear from the JBL LSR 308s I have, which also have Class D amps. So it is an apples-to-apples comparison. So overall, fantastic speakers, great mid-range, even low-end and high-end response, not fatiguing, price to performance ratio, amazing, probably the best I've heard in its class, but a little bit of hiss from the tweeters, and as long as you're playing anything above the level of a whisper, you're not even going to hear it, but it's there, and I thought I'd mention it. So that's the review of the Calis. I think they're incredible. You should check them out if you have the budget. They're an amazing mixing tool, very flat. I think if you have these, you could make world-class mixes. If you have these and you can't make mixes, the fault is not your speaker, it's the mixer. So that's a lesson I learned the hard way and did a video called The Studio Monitor Lie on way back when I started the channel. So anyhow, great speakers. Let me know if you have any questions or comments. Check out the unboxing video I did and check out the sound test where I compare them to other different speakers. There's going to be a couple different videos where I compare the Calis to a couple different speakers. So let me know what you think about all this in the comments. Let me know any questions. I'd be happy to discuss it. Stay tuned in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. Stay warm if it's cold where you are. I'll see you soon.